At over 55 years of age, pursued by 5,000 soldiers, Geronimo pushed his band to cover 70 miles a day. On foot, in the Arizona desert, in summer. That's the equivalent of running nearly 3 consecutive marathons, on terrain of rock and sand, in 113-degree heat, carrying weapons and supplies without stopping. And he did it with women, children, and warriors every bit as fast as he was. What you're going to see today isn't just the story of how the Apache trained their warriors. It's the story of the most demanding physical and mental training system that existed on the American continent in the 19th century. A system that began when the boy was 6 years old and didn't end until that boy had survived 4 real raids under fire. And when you're done watching this, you'll understand why modern special forces still study what those warriors were doing in the desert 150 years ago. Arizona, Chiricahua Mountains, the 1840s. A 6-year-old Apache boy wakes before dawn. There's no alarm clock. There's no adult shaking him awake. The system works differently here. He knows what's coming. He walks to the nearest stream. The water, on January mornings in the mountains of Arizona, is below 40 degrees. If the surface is frozen, he breaks it with a stone and gets in. This is not a punishment. This is not hazing. It is the first exercise of the day in a conditioning program that the military records of the 19th century, the anthropologists who studied the Chiricahua, and the sources documented by researcher Mark Hatmaker all agree in describing as systematic, intentional, and effective to a degree that officers of the United States Army found difficult to believe. The ice water bath was the starting signal. It prepared the nervous system for what came next. What came next was the run, but not a normal run. The trainers, veteran warriors of the clan, frequently the boy's uncles, not his parents, because it was believed that uncles would demand more without yielding to affection, gave the child a sip of water. Just one, and the instruction was clear. You will not swallow it until you finish. The boy climbed up rock slopes, dry stream beds, ravines, hills of volcanic sand, miles, with water in his mouth, forbidden to swallow it. Upon returning, the trainer inspected. The boy had to spit the water out in front of him, proving he had held it throughout the entire course. What was this for? The explanation, documented by researcher Mark Hatmaker, who analyzed the Apache running tradition based on multiple 19th century primary sources, is precise: to force exclusive nasal breathing during exercise. In the heat of the Arizona desert, nasal breathing retains significantly more moisture than mouth breathing. It preserves hydration, it preserves endurance, and it builds something harder than aerobic capacity. It builds the discipline to override instinct, because the human instinct under maximum physical exertion is to open your mouth and swallow. Suppressing it, consciously and repeatedly, for months and years, is cognitive training as much as physical training. A warrior who can't control that reflex also can't control the reflex to move when he's been completely motionless on a rock for hours, 12 inches from a soldier who still hasn't seen him. Hold on to that, because in a few minutes you're going to see why the connection between the water in the mouth and the stillness in combat is not a coincidence. It's the design. Physical training was only half the system. The other half was knowledge. And for the Apache, knowledge wasn't taught in a classroom. It was taught in the field, in motion, from the moment the boy could walk. The records from the Native Hope portal, which documents the history of the Apache nation, describe something that 19th century observers found astonishing. Many of the toys Apache children used were miniature weapons, not decorative, functional. The 6-year-old's bow shot real arrows. The spear was real wood with a sharpened point. The game was practice. Apache children played at tracking. They played at hiding. They played at ambushing. These games had precise rules that adults supervised and evaluated. Who found the hardest trail? Who stayed hidden the longest? Who got closest to the target without being detected? What looked like entertainment was actually the training of the future warrior. Anthropologist Maurice Opler, who spent years studying the Chiricahua Apache directly and published An Apache Lifeway in 1941, the definitive work on their daily life, documented that Apache children learned the specific geographies of their territory the way other children learn songs. The streams, the ridges, the passes, the hiding spots, the escape routes from every known point in the territory. It wasn't abstract knowledge. It was an operational mental map. And that mental map was what made everything else possible. The next phase of training began in adolescence, and this is where the Apache system diverged most radically from any other warrior culture on the continent. The young Apache could not declare himself a warrior. It was the group that invited him. When the clan's veterans decided the young man had the basic skills, endurance, stealth, control, knowledge of the terrain, they invited him to participate as a novice in a first raid. Only as a novice, with strict rules and rituals that historian Mark Hatmaker and the Apache Warriors Training History Portal document with precision. Before the first raid, a war shaman gave the novice 3 objects: a drinking tube, a wooden scratcher, and a special war cap, different from that of the mature warriors, because the mature warriors' cap carried spiritual power and the novices did not yet. The drinking tube was so that water would never touch his lips directly during the raid. The scratcher was so that his fingernails would never touch his own skin directly. Why these highly specific physical restrictions? Scholars of Apache culture document that the novice was considered sacred during the raid, identified with the cultural hero called Child of the Water. In that sacred state, direct contact of water with the lips or nails with the skin could disrupt the spiritual protection he needed to survive. And there was more. During the raid, the novice used a ritual warpath language. Normal words for common objects were replaced by ceremonial terms. A tree was not called a tree. Fire was not called fire. Food could only be eaten cold, to bring good luck to the others. Additionally, the novice was subservient to all adult warriors. He carried firewood, he fetched water, he performed all support tasks, and he observed every decision, every movement, every communication signal between the veterans, because this was the true function of the first raid, not to attack, to learn. 3 more raids in the same novice condition, 4 in total. Only after the 4 raids did the group vote on whether to recognize the young man as a full warrior. It was not an automatic title. It was not based on age. It was not hereditary. It was by peer evaluation under real combat conditions. The Classroom Synonym Portal, which analyzes Apache combat techniques based on 19th century historical sources, documents that leadership among the Apache was always established by merit and by the demonstrated ability to fight without incurring unnecessary losses. An Apache leader didn't accumulate spectacular victories. He accumulated successful raids where everyone came back. Because the Apache never had many warriors, they could never afford to lose them. A successful raid was one where the objective was met and no one died. The 4-raid system didn't train brave warriors. It trained efficient warriors. And now comes the piece that explains everything else. The one that connects the ice water bath at age 6 to the 55-year-old warrior covering 70 miles a day while pursued by 5,000 soldiers. There is no straight line between the boy who breaks the ice on the stream at dawn and the veteran warrior. There are 2 decades of system. The system built, layer by layer, 4 simultaneous capabilities that modern military analyses identify as the pillars of today's special operations forces: extreme physical endurance, absolute knowledge of the operational environment, cognitive discipline under stress, and the ability to operate in small autonomous units without a rigid chain of command. The United States Army Special Forces, explicitly compared to Apache warriors by the Spotter Up portal, which analyzes historical military tactics, share exactly those 4 pillars in their selection and training programs. But there is one fundamental difference. The Apache warrior built those 4 capabilities from the age of 6 continuously, integrated into every aspect of daily life, without separating training from existence. For the Apache, training wasn't something you did. It was what you were. General George Crook, who led the pursuit campaign against the Apache for years and was considered the most intelligent and respected officer in the Army during that conflict, summed it up with a phrase recorded in the historical archives of the Apache Wars: acuteness of senses, perfect physical condition, absolute knowledge of the territory, near absolute ability to preserve themselves from danger. That was not an assessment of the enemy. It was the description of a training system that Crook had studied for years and could never replicate with infinitely superior military resources. And that system had begun when Geronimo, when Cochise, when Victoria were 6 years old, in a frozen stream, before dawn, with no one forcing them, because the Apache system wasn't built on obedience. It was built on the understanding that the survival of the people depended on every warrior being, from childhood, everything he could become. That didn't require orders, it required culture. And that culture produced the warriors it took the most powerful army in the Western Hemisphere 22 years to defeat. If this opened up something you didn't expect to find, there are more stories like this waiting for you here. Systems that history forgot to explain properly. Peoples who went further than the books tell. The next story is already here.